Okay. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm on Sunluck Electrical Equipment. I have a question regarding discussion on possibility of countervailing tariff issues going into the context of this carbon trade tax. It is obvious that there will be issues when it comes to export of raw material, given coal, for example, which China purchases by a huge number. How is the Australian government dealing with this by equalizing the importers' burden? Is the government giving basically tax breaks to these companies, or they only have exemption that will expire within the next few years?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question. I'm not sure that I can fully answer it, but there has been a lot of discussion from industry groups about the economic risks to introducing this price on carbon, and it hasn't been a smooth exercise for the government. There have been a whole lot of community and interest groups, industry sector groups that have lobbied quite hard against it. So they've come up with this scheme that offers a lot of short-term support for a number of sectors, and that is at the moment short-term. I think they've got round it by offering that short-term support and talking to industry groups about keeping the whole process under review, because obviously they're not in a position to tax overseas producers. And so the accusations or the suggestions from various industry groups is that those jobs will all go offshore. Now, these arguments do tend to come up every time new taxes or new regulations are introduced in Australia, and I think the government's worked hard to try and allay those fears, but I guess they'll have to see how that goes and how that pans out. The mining and resources sector in Australia, as you'd expect, is quite a powerful business lobby group because of the support that's given to the economy. Basically, Australia's done quite well through the global financial crisis because the volumes of export to China and other countries have held up pretty well. And there's a shortage of jobs shortage of staff in the mining sector at the moment because they're booming so quickly. So they have had quite a powerful lobbying effect, and I think that's brought about all this short-term support and recognition that the situation will be kept under review. So I think that sort of part answers your question. There's not actually a clear picture of what happens beyond that 3-year period.
Okay, any other questions? I guess during the break, someone raised a question. Okay. Okay, yes, Dr. Wen.
Yes, my name is Li Wen. I'm research fellow at the Donghua Institution for Economic Research and also deputy director of Green Trade Project Office. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. I'm really amazed at greenwash that you mentioned in your presentation, and especially the federal court issue an injunction preventing this kind of engagement in similar conduct. And since we don't have this kind of concept and regulations in Taiwan here, so I would like to ask you talk more about this greenwash. What's the major principle or criteria in Australia to distinguish this environmental claim or greenwash, and what's the major type of punishment or injunctions that you mentioned? And since we are local business people here more, so what kind of a suggestion that you will give to our local business people when they are trying to make their environmental claim? Thank you.
Yeah, look, that's another very good question. And under the Trade Practices Act, it talks about whether the claims that are made in general are reasonable or not, or could be reasonably misconstrued or misunderstood. So sometimes that has to be tested in court. But I guess what the ACCC, the consumer regulatory body, do is they look at particular claims, and they've been looking quite hard at environmental claims in recent years because there's been more and more of them as the market and the interest has grown. And I think they take the view that they're not experts on environmental issues, but try and take a view of what they think it would mean in terms of the claims being made, and what would we reasonably expect from those sort of claims. And this sort of reasonableness is something that is tested out in court or through various avenues. The consumer body has had increased powers, and the levels at which fines can be set has increased quite dramatically in recent years. Quite often, the action doesn't actually lead to full-blown court hearings, but out-of-court sessions, and a view is taken beforehand by lawyers, one way or the other. And the Consumer Protection Body don't actually take action lightly, so they usually only take it when there's quite a strong case, and they usually result in some sort of action. I think the Saab example was really a bit of a sort of a slap on the wrist unofficially, and the Nappy example went a bit further. So look, it's I guess trying to understand what a claim means to the average person in the street who doesn't really understand what environmental issues are, what it might mean for them, and trying to make sure that those claims are as clear and meaningful as possible. And look, that's certainly a challenge because there's a shortage of space on products, and we're all producers are all trying to cover a whole lot of different range of issues about how the product's made, about contents, about whether it's got some environmental credentials, and just sheer space makes it a challenge sometimes to be clear and transparent about what the claim is all about. But I think certainly in Australia there's increasing concern from this regulator. It has been given more teeth because it's been seen as being largely effective and successful, and government's obviously got more confidence in it. It's had a very good and very strong chairman as well, who has driven this standard, and they've also produced their own guidelines for people and sector groups. Another area they've looked at quite hard is the carbon offset market, because there's been a lot of concern about whether those offsets are genuine, whether they're in Australia, whether they're offsetting trees that just end up dying, and they produced a fair amount of guidance and advice on that as well. So they are proactive in their approach, as well as coming down hard on organisations that are seen not to be doing the right thing. They rely on consumer groups and people to report where there are spurious claims or claims that could be misconstrued, and that's primarily, I think, where the action comes
from. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Hilary Liu from V-Dream Design CIC Incorporated from US. As you can hear, the term CIC, Common Interest Companies, from the UK system. And I noticed that your organization is called as not-for-profit company. And I didn't know that whether you explained this to the audience or this kind of concept. Do you think it is the better way to promote the green purchasing, such social aimed concept, through this kind of body, or rather than the ordinary NPO system to talk about this kind of green concept? And the second question is that because now we are doing the social enterprise education into our business practice, then we are now conducting the V-Dream project in one of the leading industrial park called Nehu Industrial Park. The revenue they make is couple billions US or pounds, then the people are asking us that while the company is saving every penny in order to make something for their organization, why we need to do this kind of green movement or the green purchasing to either spend more labor costs to come up with this kind of methodology and to educate our suppliers. So we'd like to hear what you think about this kind of doctrine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, EcoBuy started life as a government-funded program from the state government, the Victorian government, and we were about 5 years ago given some additional grant funding to become an independent body as we were moving out of working just in the local government sector to working more broadly with organisations. So I think being not for profit does help in terms of having an independent view and I guess having a general vision which is around the greater good. But on the other side of it, we have to make money as any organisation does. We just wouldn't give it to shareholders. We put it back into the business. So I mean, I think there are actually pros and cons in being a not-for-profit, but overall it gives you a stronger sort of feeling of independence and not having a particular angle or a particular sector representation. Look, it's a positive thing and it's worth enforcing. Sometimes that creates challenges in terms of the people we recruit who are very committed to the cause, but also less commercial in their outlook, and I always have to try and encourage them to be as commercial as possible, as well as making sure that we're achieving an overall vision which is about the greater good and reducing environmental impacts. In terms of the social enterprise side of things, I got a little bit lost in your question, but I think we did quite a bit of work with another group called Social Traders, who are a great Australian-based organisation who are there to help social enterprises by providing guidance and support for those businesses to make sure that they can run as effective businesses. And they also are starting to provide advice on procuring more socially in a socially aware way. And that's gaining, as I mentioned in my presentation, quite a lot of traction from governments, and particularly local government. We have quite a high rate of immigration in Australia, and some different migrant groups struggle to find jobs. So local governments are keen to try and support those and make sure that they are earners for society and can pay tax and contribute the same as anything else, and want to play a role in helping those communities. They may be disadvantaged groups, they may be part of a broader economic strategy which actually means that you can create very vibrant regions in regional Australia where the populations are falling. Look, I'm not sure. Ask me again if that's not really answering your question. I'm sorry.
For example, you just mentioned that for the social enterprises, you make sure that they implement all their business in accordance with the environmental and social principles. And for the people that we're working with now, we're demonstrating in Neihu Industrial Park, which is one of the leading business development areas that all the listed companies or the MNC are all there. So that we're trying to spread the word by, for example, green purchasing or the fair trade principles. But quite often the Taiwanese companies or the people that they will ask for me or as the company CEO to do such thing, to do such good business, but what can I get out from it? Because for the government here that we don't have such regulations or legislation like in the UK when I was conducting the social enterprise management in the University of Cambridge, that my professor was the advisor to the UK government for the SME, so that they have this kind of certain principles and policies to do this green purchasing thing. For example, they will call the minority purchasing, that they will have certain percentage for this kind of people, or while you're doing certain amount of purchasing on behalf of the government, that you have to be aware of the thing that you're purchasing is actually in accordance with this kind of principles by showing the figures. So I'm wondering whether in Australia also have that kind of principles, and then how would you suggest for us, like I would say, developing countries, that we are now trying to adopt this kind of Western green concept, and how to share the ideas to have those big companies that they can join this kind of green purchasing or green movement. Thank you.
Yeah, look, it clearly is a challenge, and I think it's fair to say Europe's probably a little way ahead of where Australia's at. There's perhaps a broader, more general acceptance about the role that large organisations should play in society, but it's still quite hard to turn that into dollars and investment, and we find that hard. I think the messages sometimes that we promote to different organisations do vary. So a lot of governments have policy or regulatory requirements about operating more sustainably, and that's fairly straightforward. I think with businesses, they've clearly got to focus on the bottom line and on dollars, and that's fine. But the principles of sustainable purchasing are about efficiency, are about reducing costs, are about better use of materials. And often in many cases can have financial drivers. We sometimes get involved in sort of efficiency initiatives with particular companies where, something as simple as stationery purchasing, where at the moment they're purchasing, 56 different blue biros. Nobody needs 56 different blue biros, so we often focus on reducing the range that's available to their employees, and then build in greener alternatives in doing that. So it's a sort of a double way of approaching it. Of course, they don't have to. They could just go for the cheapest biro and didn't need to be green at all. But those are the sorts of approaches we try and use. And look, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I think the fact that, it is about better management of an organisation. It is about better reputation management, reducing your risk. It is about asking whether you need the purchase in the first place, and whether there's demand management strategies that you can reduce the amount you buy are important principles. Quite often those get ignored, where the answer is, of course we need to buy something. What's a greener alternative? But they're increasingly stacking up, and especially when you're looking at things like energy efficiency. There's increasing energy costs in Australia. Actually, the costs of investment in a network to improve the distribution network of power are a lot higher than the impact of a price on carbon. But that's just another thing. So those price signals and those price mechanisms are going to drive more and more organisations into looking at this. Because if you don't, your power bills will stay the same, and your competitors will be half, and they'll be much more competitive than you. So sometimes it's about different messages for different organisations, but I think the principles are in there, and most organisations would recognise that they're important.
Okay, thanks for the question and answers. Okay, go. Yeah, Dr. Wang, please.
Okay. After listening to your slides and lesson, I feel the main emphasis should be on the sustainable procurement rather than green purchase or eco-labeling, because the sustainability incorporates more and comprehensive and sound principles behind either economic criteria that is already reflected on the cost and the price. And then the most important is the environmental principle. We talk about eco-labeling or green label or voluntary standards. The third one is the social ethicness. How do we invent a very simple and compound or comprehensive index to let consumers know these two index, environmental index and the social ethic index ranking? Because in the capitalism society, we cannot, enforce consumer to purchase something or not, or enforce the government procurement policy concentrate on certain, procurement or suppliers. What we have to do is the government should lay out a fair, transparent ground, let the supplier to compete within these three contexts, that is economic, environmental, and social ethicness. So the better way, I think, is try to overcome the barrier. The main barrier to the consumer is the information demonstration. We lack of the information about this kind of products, lack of environmental concern or lack of the social, the ethic standards. So if you can give me very simple 2 or 3 standards labeling about the environmental index or the social ethnic index, then it's let the consumer to decide. Should we like to buy the more expensive one, but less standards in the environmental or social, or you can buy the cheap one? It all depends on consumers' choice. It's freedom of choice. The government only needed to set the minimum requirement for the environment and the social ethnic standards. That's it. So I think currently, seems to me in Australia, still lack of this kind of regulation or law. It's all relies on post approach. It means only after the industry made false environmental claim, and then you spend a lot of taxpayers' money to prosecute, and in the very long, court procedure. So why not just set the minimum standards and a simple index enforced by law to disclose this kind of information to consumer? So in this way, it will reduce a lot of the cost suit, and also most of the environment problem is come from the externality. We economists call it externality, like the carbon emission or other kind of solid waste or other kind of emissions, because we do not have put cost on these. So if the government puts comprehensive cost on the externalities, then I think your claim about the cheap cost for environmental goods, that will become true. Otherwise, at current market level, it's very difficult to let the green product to compete with green products. So the government needs to put more regulation on the cost, such as carbon tax or emission trading or any or other externality costs to justify the environmental goodness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was an awful lot in that, and I agreed with most of it. I think we're certainly, as an organisation, moving to become a centre in sustainable procurement rather than just environmental, and we've got a project plan to do that, where we're, I guess, trying to spend some time to build up the right framework and capability and capacity. But you're right, really that is where the focus should be. In terms of social standards and your questions about what those should be, that's certainly there's certainly a challenge, and I don't really have the answer for those. There are World Health Organization standards around child labour and things like that, which I guess you would expect as a minimum. With products like fair trade, there is some way of defining a measure, but more broadly in terms of sort of social enterprises and things like that, it's all around definitions and really what they do and what they produce. So look, it is complex, which I think we know, because if it was easy, there'd be some standards out there that were relatively easy to apply. I'm not sure about the suggestion of government just producing more regulation, although I do agree that there isn't enough in the area. I think when government introduces regulations, it tends to just address the sort of worst performers in the sector, rather than trying to stretch the boundaries a little bit. We're seeing some moves out of Europe around rewarding superior environmental or sustainability performance through contracts. So, for example, somebody might be seeking low-emission vehicles for a fleet, and could set a greenhouse gas emission standard at a certain level. But I've seen some examples of contracts where they've offered bonuses through the contract for suppliers that could go above and beyond that standard. So a way of rewarding superior environmental performance, which I think is quite innovative, and perhaps the way that might help stretch and encourage the market. But look, I mean, I think there's no national well-recognised eco label in Australia, apart from a couple of specific ones for energy and water use for white goods that the government introduced. And those are the ones that people recognise. The other labels aren't really well known, that come from voluntary groups or private groups. So I certainly think that the government has a much stronger role to play. Internationally, there are some long-standing labels like the Nordic Swan from Scandinavia and the Blue Angel from Germany that have been around for a lot longer. I think one of them came in the 70s, and they've created much more recognition in those countries over a longer period of time, and with government support. So look, I'm pretty much agreeing with nearly all of what you said, and I think I'd like to come back, or like to think that I could come back in 12 months' time, and the tenure and steer of my presentation would be different, would be much more about sustainable purchasing. But I still think some of those issues around social standards and criteria, and I guess lack of really strong regulation from government, will still be there. But we've all got to play our part in trying to drive and advocate for those, and I think you're exactly right.
As an extension to what the professor at Tsinghua Institute was asking, will there be an emission cap imposed on residents or individual Australian taxpayers? The Australian government does at the moment provide subsidies to households, but this still leaves few hardbound obligations for the consumers in the carbon supply chain. So if you're not obligated as a consumer to report to a certain target, then wouldn't that be rather uneven in terms of obligations? That's basically what I'm wondering about. Is there any move to actually impose this kind of hard cap eventually?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, and I don't see it happening in the short term or foreseeable future. Perhaps I think households are increasingly conscious of increasing energy bills, and Australians have had it good for a lot of years with very cheap, easy, accessible resources. That is ending, if you like, in terms of the way energy prices are going. So there's a lot of interest in grants and things like that are available for photovoltaic cells when those are available. And what tends to happen is the government allocates so many hundreds of millions of dollars to it, they're oversubscribed, and then they cut it off and it ends. Yeah, I think energy efficiency and building standards are improving, but Australian houses. I was brought up in the UK. Australian houses aren't generally well insulated and well built from an energy perspective, and a lot of these new houses that are being built in Australian suburbs are very, very large, have huge numbers of downlights, for example, and want more and more appliances and access to air conditioning and things like that. So on the one hand, they're being built to slightly better standards, or standards that we should have had anyway, and on the other hand, they are tending to expect more access to electrical appliances and more use of electrical appliances. So look, there are still a lot of challenges around. There's more awareness from households on costs and cost issues, which is perhaps driving some use down. But yeah, it's a big issue.
Okay. Any other questions? Maybe during a break, someone raised a question about the tariff for green products into Australia. Could you say something about that to them? Some policy?
Yeah, I mean, there's no. I guess tariffs and charges are things that the government always explores, and there's always those issues about protecting Australian jobs. I mean, we're very supportive of green products from any part of the world, as long as they are genuine green. And that sometimes means that we come up with challenges from industry groups who are trying to encourage buying Australian. Often the environmental impact of transporting goods is relatively small, and so unless you're looking at sort of social issues or jobs in Australia, from an environmental point of view, it doesn't matter where they're made. The environmental impacts from other parts of its life cycle are much bigger. So from my point of view, if it's a good green product that really addresses its life cycle impact, it doesn't matter where it's made.
I'm Steph from Green Trade Project Office, and I'm curious about that. You have mentioned the mining industry, the bargaining power from mining industry is actually very strong in Australia. And will it comes to the carbon disclosure project or the carbon tax, would it become some compromise into the mining industry? And will it force the government to start some subsidies to SME, since they have to pay more disclosure cost when they have to enforce this law? Thank you.
Look, most of the miners are being given short-term protection from the carbon tax as it's planned at the moment, but the long-term future of that, as I mentioned in a previous question, is uncertain.